topic of the webinar this week will be our NVR supporting software and using browsers to access the web interface of our NVRs. So it's going to be a little bit more than that. So today, what I'm going to be talking about is I'm going to be talking about using our free EasyTools software to troubleshoot and diagnose camera issues. I'll also be talking about the methods to apply firmware upgrades to cameras and to NVRs. I'll be talking about troubleshooting issues with camera connectivity to the NVR and how to access the web interface of NVRs and cameras in a web browser. So this presentation will take about 45 minutes, and then after that there will be an open question and answer. If you have a question at any time during the presentation, please hold it till please either type it in the chat. Okay. Audio is quiet. Let me try something. Is that better? Please let me know if I need to adjust that volume a little bit more. Okay. So again, if you have a question at any point during the presentation, please just type it in the chat, and I'll get to the questions at the end. Or you can just hold that to the very end, and I'll address any questions you might have. So without anything else, then we can get started. So the first topic I'm going to be talking about today is our free EasyTools software. And I'm sure some of you are probably already familiar with EasyTools, but for those who aren't, EasyTools is a free software that we provide. And this software can be used from a PC in order to do a number of things that will assist with troubleshooting and configuring our NVRs and cameras. So what you can do with it is it'll allow you to automatically scan a customer's network and find all the NVRs and all the cameras on the network and provide you with an amount of information relating to those cameras. So you'll be able to see, the IP address, the MAC address, the serial number, and it can also be used to perform any sort of batch configuration. If you need to change some settings on the cameras all at once, you can do that with EasyTools, as well as there are a couple other features which I'll be showing you in a little bit. But just for now, I'm going to show you where EasyTools can be downloaded from and how we can actually get that started. So we provide EasyTools here on our website, petawise.com. And to get to EasyTools, all you're going to want to do is going under support, and then you're going to go to technical support. And then under technical support, we're going to go to client application. And here we have the EasyTools download. And here you're just going to extract the file from the zip and install it onto your computer, and you'll be able to use EasyTools. So let's launch EasyTools, and let's take a look at it and see some of the features that are here. So here we have EasyTools, and as we can see, it's already performed a search on the network, and it's come up with 2 NVRs that we can see here, and these are the NVRs that are on the same network that I'm on. And here we can see a couple of bits of information. But we can see we have the IP address, device name, model, version, MAC, and this will be our firmware version. And there's actually a couple more bits of information we can grab. If we hit that this gear icon here, we can actually adjust. We can see by default it uses an ONVIF multicast, and I'll be talking a little bit more about that. But we can also change it to search based on IP segments. And we can also adjust the items that appear in our list on EasyTools. So if we want, one of the most useful ones is to bring up the serial number of the device. So if we hit serial number, we just hit OK. Well, now we're able to see the serial numbers of our devices here. And this lets us quickly identify which actual NVR and camera we're talking about when we're looking at EasyTools here. So we can really use our MAC address or use our serial number to say, this is this camera, even if we haven't done any of that sort of addressing yet and we don't know which camera is which. So here I'm going to have a diagram here for you, and we have here a little sort of network diagram here showing a scenario where EasyTools is being used. So a quick explanation about this, and one other note, don't worry about having to keep up with every single diagram along, because I'm going to be going through them rather quickly, because every single diagram I use here is going to be emailed out to all the attendees of the webinar, and they'll be able to be downloaded at any time from our website. So you can go through the documents at your leisure and sort of take a look at them if you want to. But just for now, I'm going to run through them quickly. So here we have a scenario where there's two PCs running EasyTools. So we have red PC here and yellow PC here. And then we have our NVR on the network, a couple of cameras just outside of the NVR on the network, and some things connected over to a PoE switch here. We also have our green PC and our blue PC. So what I've done here is just to demonstrate how EasyTools will work over the network. Is the two main rules you want to follow is that EasyTools will not go out to the internet. It will not cross out into a different network. And the most important rule to keep in mind is that it will not cross over an NVR, because an NVR splits the network into two different things. You have your internal network with your cameras and your PoE switches and all that, and then you have the customer's network on the other side of it. So you can see here, the red PC is able to see these two cameras that are on the customer's side of the network, and they're able to see the NVR itself because we're facing the NVR. Same goes for the yellow PC, and one thing to note here is we're using a wireless connection with this red PC. It doesn't matter, EasyTools will work wired, wireless, it's all good. But we can't see these cameras down here because these are on this side, the internal camera side of the NVR. However, if we connect in our PCs to a PoE switch that's connected to the NVR, or we connect it just directly into one of the PoE ports on the NVR, we are then able to see all the cameras connected into the NVR. But we then can't see the cameras outside because you can't cross over the NVR. So let me go back and pull up EasyTools again. So again, here we have EasyTools, and you can see there's a couple of other buttons here that we can use to check cameras. So if we want to, we can take our NVR, we can right click, and we can hit Modify Network Address, and this allows us to actually push out and assign addresses to individual NVRs or cameras from a single central location. So we can also set up, this will be our username and password so that it authorizes the changes. We need to put in the correct username and password and then whatever IP address, subnet, mask, gateway we want. We can also do this in a batch sense. If we go batch configure here, this will let us, I think I have the wrong one here. So if we do batch configure, let me log in here. Sorry, yeah, that's going to work for IP cameras. That's going to let us set up some of the encoding settings here. But what we can do with an NVR is we can do, this comes up, an upgrade here. So you see now we go to local upgrade, and we see we have our NVR, and if we had more than one selected, they would all appear here, and we can select the firmware file and apply that to all the NVRs. We can also go and check out some of the daylight savings time setting, and there's a whole bunch of options we can use, more available usually with cameras, but there are a couple we can do with NVRs. And we can, of course, click this button here, this E, to access the web interface of the NVR. We hit our configuration button here. Just gives us some system information. So that's the sort of side of EasyTools for configuration, but there's one more interesting feature with EasyTools, and that's our disk calculator. At the top, we just hit disk calculator. We switch over to the tab here. We see that there is layouts here, and what this section of EasyTools is used for is it's used to essentially calculate how long of a recording we're going to get with a given set of cameras and a given size of hard drive, or tell us how large of a hard drive we're going to need based on a certain number of camera settings. So let's say I have a 2 terabyte hard drive in my NVR, and I'm going to be recording 24/7, and what I can do is I can add in, and I want to say, okay, I'm using eight 2-megapixel cameras, so we're going to leave the resolution at 1080p, which is 2 megapixels. We're going to leave our frame rate. This is all going to be the same as the default that's on our cameras. So default, we're going to have our 1080p, 25 frames per second. This is our bit rate, and we're going to have 8 here because we have 8 cameras. So we add in our channel, and we select this, and we see now it tells us with our 2 terabyte hard drive, we're getting 5 days of recording down there. So if I up that and I want to have a 4 terabyte model, then we see that increases up to 11 days. And we can, set any of the sort of settings. What do we get if we change this? And let's say we want to drop the frame rate down to 15, okay? And now how does that affect our recording time? Well, we went up to 22 days. So you can very quickly adjust the settings here and see how that's going to impact your archive time. So it's a couple interesting things you can do with Easy Tools. It's a very useful tool if you play around with it and see what can be done. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about our firmware. So what we can do here is if we take a look here at this firmware chart, our firmware is defined usually by a string of letters and numbers. And a lot of these numbers are just used for internal purposes, or used for checking version numbers on our end. But there are a couple numbers that you can look at in our firmware versions that will tell you a little bit of information about them. And now here in this image you see this is a firmware number for an NVR. So we have R2319P22. Now, the only numbers that are really crucial for you to look at when you're looking at this is the first 2 numbers, the letter, it might be a B, it might be an R here, but the first 2 numbers, so here we have 23. What those indicate, if you see over here, is that those actually determine which NVR model these apply to. So in this case, we have a 23, which means that this firmware is for one of our NVR 201 or 202 series. And if we have a different numbers. If you see 3, it's going to be for one of the 300 series. If you see a 5, it's going to be the 500 series. And the other important number to take into consideration is the 2 numbers after that. So this one, you might see, 2315, 2317, 2319. And this second set of numbers here, number 3 and 4 after the B or the R, that indicates the major version of the firmware. And a higher number of that is going to mean a newer version of the firmware. So here we have 19, but of course if we have a 21 there, that's going to be a newer version, and 15 is going to be an older version. Now, we do introduce a whole host of stability updates, security updates, and new features in every new firmware release. But a couple of the major features to keep into consideration are in 2315, we moved to a new interface style from the previous firmware versions. If you've been working with NVRs for a while, you may remember the old interface. In version 1.7, we added Mac support to the web interface for NVRs, and we reduced the number of ports that need to be opened on the network to access the NVR. For version 19, we added a whole host of new features. We added support to push cloud updates from the web to cameras, to use custom ports with EasyCloud, and to manually remove devices from EasyCloud. So generally, a similar system applies with the IP camera firmware versions. However, the model numbers information and the firmware version information are in slightly different spots. So here is an example of an IP camera firmware number. So we have IPC Q1201 B5017 P30 D1607. And same thing as before, our red indicates the firmware type. So we have Q1201, but it's not quite as clear-cut which cameras this actually corresponds to. Now, this is something that is important, but it shouldn't really be recorded on your end, because if you go to our Petawise website here, let me just pull that up. So we're back on our Petawise website. If we go in and we head over to firmware upgrade page under support, and we go to IP camera, you'll see that we have our information. We have, D1201, which is for these models of cameras, but we have our whole listing here of which number corresponds to which firmware. You don't have to worry about this number because you just look up your camera model here, and that'll give you the correct download. So, but one thing that you may want to take a look at when we're looking at our IP camera firmware version is the last four numbers. So it's going to be, D, and then here we have 1607, and that's going to be, like with the NVR, our major firmware release. So, as usual, the higher number is going to be in a newer version. So 1702 is newer than 1607, and it works much the same. If you see that there's a newer version, higher number for the last four numbers, you can increase that firmware version. So that's a firmware version, and one other thing I want to talk about related to firmware is about the what methods through which we can actually upgrade firmware on both our NVRs or camera. And I'm sure a lot of you are familiar with the process of upgrading, but I'm going to introduce to you maybe some ways that you might be unfamiliar with that you can upgrade firmware. So I'm not going to go through this whole chart here, but here are the three main ways that we recommend to upgrade the firmware on your NVRs. So the easiest way we know about is to upgrade firmware by cloud. And this way, we know we can just go to the maintenance, upgrade by cloud, and as long as your NVR is connected to the internet, you'll be able to download that upgrade and upgrade by cloud. Another way you can upgrade them is by loading the firmware, download the firmware file on your computer from our PetaWise website, load it onto a USB stick, and load that into the NVR. And it's a fairly straightforward process. You just find the file in the USB and load it in, and you'll be able to upgrade the firmware same way as you did by cloud. But the benefit of doing it by USB disk, and usually we recommend the cloud upgrade if it's available, because that's one click. You don't have to worry about any sort of downloads. It'll always work. It'll always get you to your latest version. But by USB disk is useful for a site where there is no internet available to that NVR. USB disk does not need actually networks to be set up before you can use it, because it's just loading the file from the USB disk. And the third way that you can do is, if you have a file stored on your computer or on a computer and you access the NVR's web interface, you're able to just send a file from the computer to the NVR. And this way is actually usually the most stable way of upgrading the NVR. It doesn't require internet, but of course if you need to download the file, you're going to need internet. But you do need a connection to the NVR. And this way is the most compatible way. If, for whatever reason, your USB disk isn't working, or if you can't connect to the internet to download a cloud upgrade, the network upgrade is the most stable and most reliable way of upgrading the firmware. So the methods are rather similar for taking a look at the IP camera firmware, except this time a lot of our options involve pushing the upgrades through the NVR. So one thing that some people may not be familiar with is, if we go and we take a look at the web interface of one of our NVRs, so I'm going to pull up here, just open this up. I believe that was on 107 here. My mistake. I have a 6 there. Okay. So, just gonna give this permission to run here. Okay. So if we head in here and we go over to camera, and this works much the same way on the HMI interface of the NVR, and we go into advanced settings. Actually, let me pull up the HMI interface. That would probably be better. Let's see here. So, pull up that. we see here, we have our NVR, and if we end up going into camera, and then we have our advanced tab up here, we see there's a couple options here, and this is, you can see upgrade by cloud, upgrade by disk. But our normal way to upgrade the NVRs is to go into maintain, and then to upgrade, and we have upgrade by cloud, local upgrade. What does this refer to? Well, this is actually a way that we can upgrade the camera's firmware through the NVR. So if we go here and we hit our buy cloud, what this will actually do is it will go and it will download, it will find the upgrade for the camera on the cloud, download it to the NVR, and then send that upgrade to the camera. And that way, as long as our connection is good on the NVR, we don't need to worry about getting a connection to the cameras. We don't need to worry about downloading a specific file for the cameras. This lets us just, with one click, upgrade the firmware on the cameras. And even if we don't have internet, we can do this with a file on a USB disk. So we load the disk into the NVR. We can just go to the buy disk here and upgrade the files on the cameras without actually connecting to the cameras. And this allows for a much more convenient method of actually upgrading the firmware on our cameras. So let's see here. Now, so you can see, and then of course our default way that we can use to upgrade the cameras is to connect to that web interface with their IP address, same way as we would on the NVR, and upgrade it using the file from our computer. And again, this way is the most compatible way, but of course it's usually a little bit more of a hassle to get into the camera's web interface. But if we need to, that option is always available to us. So I thought I would talk a little bit about suggestions for when we actually should be upgrading firmware, because I find that a lot of technicians, a lot of installers are confused about whether or not they should upgrade the firmware. And in our recommendation, in general, each one of our firmware releases, although we release new features, are stable and secure all on their own. So, as a general rule, firmware does not need to be upgraded for the most part unless something is not working or a new feature is required, because every single released version is going to be stable. It's not like you're going to have crashing, errors, bugs, any sort of thing. All firmware versions released are stable. It just means that we might want to upgrade if something is not working or if there is a new feature we want. And this is especially true for NVRs. We can leave NVRs as they are, no concern, but if we want, say, for example, the ability to access it through the web interface on Mac, well, we might want to upgrade it if we're not on the right version to have that. And for cameras, it's a little bit more lenient. You can upgrade the firmware whenever you want, and if possible, you can upgrade the firmware of the cameras. But one point that we do want to get across is if you are upgrading the firmware version on an NVR, we do recommend to upgrade the firmware version for the cameras connected to that NVR alongside it, if that is at all possible. So that's enough for firmware version, and now I thought I'd talk a little bit about troubleshooting sort of your connectivity between cameras and your NVR, as well as connectivity between the NVR and the internet. So one thing to note is there is a system that our plug-and-play PoE NVRs use, and I'm going to bring this up here again on the NVR. So here we have our NVR again, and one thing to keep in mind here is when we connect the camera to the back of our NVR, we plug it into a port, and by default, it's going to plug in and it's going to work. Plug and play, no configuration, all that is set up. And the way this is actually determined is through a system that we have. And if we go in and we take a look at one of our cameras, and we go and we configure one of our cameras with a little edit pencil here. Oh, not that one. So here we have, you see at the top here we have our information about IP address. We have camera IP, port, protocol, all this information. But up at the top here we actually have an option called add mode. And here if we drop it down, we see we have options called manual and plug and play. And understanding the difference between these is actually very important for setting up cameras on our NVR. So by default, we can see here on our NVR, this is a 8-channel NVR, or no, I believe this is actually a 16-channel. Yeah, this is a 16-channel NVR. So we see here we have 16 channels here, and by default, if we go to each of these and we go to edit each of them, we'll see that they are all set to plug and play. And what this actually determines is this actually means we see we have 1 to 16 here, and we know that we have ports number 1 through 16 on the back of our PoE NVR here. We have on our PoE ports on the back numbered 1 to 16. And what plug and play actually does when we have it set to plug and play, which is our default behavior, is this actually determines what that port is doing when we plug something into it. Now, with plug and play, that means the port is going to be looking for a UniView camera at the other end of that wire. So by default, if we're just plugging in a cable to the BAT port and plugging in a UniView camera at the other end of that, plug and play will work, no problems. But if we want to use that port to connect to a switch with multiple cameras, for example, what we need to do is we actually need to go in, we need to edit that. If we go in and we edit that, and we change that to manual, you'll see that now we're able to define all sorts of things about protocol and IP address. And this plug and play versus manual is very important when setting up things like a number of cameras on a PoE switch connected to an NVR. Because if you tell the NVR that port 8 is plug and play, and then you plug in a switch on port 8, and it's still set to plug and play, and you have multiple cameras, the NVR will keep assigning random addresses to the cameras on that switch because it thinks there's a single camera at the end, because that's what you've told it by saying it's on plug and play. So if we want to set multiple cameras on a switch, we're going to need to set that to manual. Or if we have a camera that's on the customer side of the network instead of on the NVR side of the network, we also need to then set it to manual. So anytime we're not doing a situation where it's simply PoE port, wire, and then camera, we're going to need to change that from plug and play to manual and set up our things like IP address and port and all these things as well. So what happens if you plug in a camera or you've set it up on a switch and you've given it an address and set up all the settings here, but it just doesn't want to come online? What should be your first real steps to solve that problem? And here I have a diagram of what I would suggest here. So if we take a look at this chart here, here I have a couple of explanations and suggestions for different camera statuses. And where can we find the camera statuses? Well, on our NVR, if we go to maintain, which is the place where we're going to find all things about statuses, logs, all this sort of thing, and we go down to system info and then up top to camera, we'll see that there's a whole bunch of statuses here. We have status offline, network disconnected, status online, and each of these correspond to the camera number here and our camera name here. Now, what do each of these statuses mean? Well, there are really 4 possibilities as to what can appear in that status bar. And here on our chart, we have we have the 4 statuses. We can see offline network disconnected, which we saw there. We can have offline incorrect username or password. We have offline, we have online. And I can let you run through this chart, take a look at it later if you'd like. But for now, a quick explanation of each of them. is offline network disconnected means our NVR has no network connection, no ability to ping the cameras at the other end of that line. So that can be caused really by two different things. That can be caused either by some sort of physical disconnection electrically between the camera and the NVR, or it can be caused by issues with IP addressing. So what we can do is we can use the link lights on the rear of the NVR to let us know whether our physical connection is good. So here I have an image for you, and we can see down here, underneath our PoE ports, we have a couple of indicator lights here. So you see beside our one, we have a little light with an arrow pointing down, and on the other side we have a little light with an arrow pointing up. So this one with the arrow pointing down beside one is indicating our port number 1 here, and the one with the arrow pointing up is to determine port 2. And these lights actually tell us, is the cable plugged into this connection? Is it seeing anything at the other end of the line? And if there's something powered on at the other end of the line, in our case usually a camera, we're going to see that link light at least be on. It might not be flashing, but it'll at least be on. And this means that our physical connection is good. So if we don't see that link light, if we see that the link light's off for a specific port and that camera's not working, that probably means there's something wrong where the camera's not powering on or there's some disconnect in the cable somewhere. But if we do see it on, that lets us know that we should probably be taking a look more at the addressing part of it because we know our electrical connection to the camera is good. So some of the other statuses, again, we can see offline incorrect username or password here. And this usually refers to an error with the incorrect username and password, but what it can also refer to is an error with the port selected for the camera. If you don't use port 80 or port 81 for our cameras, which are the HTTP ports that they communicate with the NVR on, you're going to get off incorrect username or password because you're going to be accessing the camera, but the camera won't reply because you're not calling it on the correct port. And very rarely, this can sometimes be caused by a cable that's only slightly damaged. So if you see this offline incorrect username or password and you know all your information is 100% correct, you might want to test the cable connected to the camera as well. Another status you can see is just offline with absolutely no message. What this means is, it essentially means the camera is currently starting up. So if you see the status offline, give the camera 5 minutes or so. At most, it usually only take about a minute to start up and just check again the status, see if it's come back online. If you keep seeing the status be offline or switching between offline, network disconnected, and offline, make sure that there's no sort of power issues with the camera because that might mean that the camera's powering off, powering on, powering off, powering on. And the last status we're going to see there, which we saw on our cameras there, was online. And that, of course, means the camera's online, it's connected to the NVR. And if you see the status, but you're still getting a black screen, you're still getting no video at all, your first step would probably be to upgrade the camera firmware to make sure. You might have an old camera firmware, new NVR firmware, might not be compatible working together. So just upgrade the firmware on your camera if you're getting this issue. So that's the first place we really want to take a look when we have a specific camera or a number of cameras that are not showing up on the monitor for the NVR. But what can we do if they're showing up, but our NVR is not working with EasyCloud or we're not able to get an internet connection? Well, one of the first places, we have another status indicator there, and let me just pull this up on our NVR here. Pull up our NVR. One of the first places you might want to check when looking at our issues connecting to the internet is probably we want to go to System and then Network first. And we can take a look here and we can see what's the IP address of the NVR to make sure if we're using a DHCP system, if we're trying to get an address from the customer's router, we can make sure Enable DHCP is checked. We can check the subnet mask and the default gateway of the NVR. So this is going to be some useful information here that we can grab. And the one-stop, just quick, what's going on status we can look at is if we head over to EasyCloud, this will give us a device status here. And like the camera status, there are a couple things that can actually appear here. So I have another chart, and if we take a look at our EasyCloud status chart here, we can see there's a couple. There's going to be one that's offline, devices unreachable. We're going to have one that's device has been enabled with manual port forwarding. We're going to have one that says offline, device has not been added, and we're going to have online. So what each of these mean, again, it's similar to the camera troubleshooting, that these actually correspond to specific states of how connected the NVR is. So offline, the device is unreachable. Like offline network disconnected for the camera means that the device has no connection out to the internet whatsoever. Now, this can actually mean, again, it can be determined by probably about two things. It's going to be caused by a physical problem. So, for example, if the cable on the router that's connecting to the NVR is unplugged, we're going to get that status because obviously if we're not getting to the customer's router, we're not going to get out to the internet. Or it can be some issue with, for example, picking up an address through DHCP, or just some sort of issue that's causing the NVR to not actually get out to the internet. And of course, the way we would troubleshoot this again is by looking at a link like break down whether it's a physical problem or a logical problem, and then sort of see on the customer's network whether that can get connected or not. If we see the device has been enabled with manual port forwarding, what that means is that under our port mapping section of the NVR, so if we pull that up, if on our NVR we go and we set under port mapping, if we set our port mapping to use manual instead of UPnP, well, we're going to get that status on EasyCloud whether the network is working or not. Because essentially what it's saying to you is you set up manual port forwarding. That means you should be making sure the ports are forwarded, the network's working good. So it's going to tell you that no matter what. It doesn't mean it's offline, it doesn't mean it's online, but that's what it's going to give you if you set up manual port forwarding. And back to our chart here. We might also see the device has been added to the cloud website, and this is good because this tells us our network connection to EasyCloud is great. We just need to add the device to EasyCloud. So this means you're ready to go and you're ready to add the device to the customer's EasyCloud account. And if we see a status of online, that means the network connection is good and the device has been added to an EasyCloud account already. And on the page where it's been added, we'll be able to see a listing called username, and that'll tell us which account that's been added to. So again, one principle that I like to advise for troubleshooting is to work outwards whenever you're trying to solve any sort of network problem. And what I mean by that is, let's say, for example, we have a scenario where our cameras are working on our device, but we are not able to ping out to the internet. We're not able to get a connection to EasyCloud at all. When we go to our EasyCloud status here, it says the device has not been added to the cloud website. Well, if I go to basic, I can see it's picking up an address DHCP-wise, but what I can do is I can take my default gateway, and that'll tell me the address of the router. So we have 192.168.8.10. And what I can actually do is if I go down to maintain, and then network info, and then net detect, this test address here actually allows us to perform a network ping and test, do we have a connection to this IP address? So one of the first things we can try is to check where is the problem in connection occurring. So we can check. We check. First thing we're going to do is just try and set our router's address here. So we put in our default gateway, 168.8.10. 10. We'll try test. We can see we're getting a response from the router, and that means, okay, our connection to the router is good. So then we work out from there and see, do we have a connection to the internet? And we can use a public server, such as Google's DNS server, which is at 8.8.8.8. We can test with that, and we see we're getting a response back from that as well. So with a system like this, we're able to quickly work out and see whether the problem is between the NVR and the router or between the router and the internet, and that lets us get the problem solved a little bit quicker. So that's it for sort of the troubleshooting section, but one other system I want to talk about was accessing our cameras and our NVR's web interface through a web browser. Now, there are a couple things to keep in mind with this. The first and most important one is that the only browser that will work fully with our cameras is Internet Explorer. So here I am running Internet Explorer, and I have one of our NVRs here, and you can see if I go into live view, I'm able to bring up the cameras, no problem, all good. But if I go and I try to launch, say, Firefox, so let me just share Firefox here. So I'm sharing Firefox. And if I go back and I go to our NVR again, 107, it'll connect and it'll come through and it'll say that it's launching the plugin, and I can even log in, and we're even able to go in here, but okay, well I must have an old version of Firefox here, because I'm going to tell you, on a modern Firefox, you won't be able to start up the camera here. And the same goes for Google Chrome. You will be able to access the interface here. You will be able to get in. You'll be able to change any of the settings on any browser. But if you want to be able to view the cameras, we are only allow Internet Explorer, and that's because that's the only browser that the plugin will run in. Now, one thing I wanted to note was you are likely aware of this, but many customers, many end users of the NVR are not aware of this. And in Windows 10, Microsoft introduced a new browser. They introduced Microsoft Edge. And there actually is a difference between Internet Explorer and Edge. As you can see here, the logos look very similar, but Edge is their more modern, new browser, and Internet Explorer is their older browser. And there's a slight difference. You see the yellow swirl here. And our plugin will not work in Edge. It will only work in Internet Explorer 11. So by default, Edge is the one that's enabled in Windows 10. So I'm just going to load up here my Windows 10 machine. Let me see here. Okay. And now let me just pull that up. Okay, so here I'm on our Windows 10 machine. And we can see down here we have, well, not Internet Explorer, we have Microsoft Edge. And the way we can get Internet Explorer on Windows 10, of course, all we need to do is search in our bar, Internet Explorer, and we see this one's got the yellow swirl, Internet Explorer. We started up, of course, not the same as Edge. And we can just, what I like to do is I like to pin that to the taskbar and unpin Microsoft Edge. And that way, if you have someone who's not really familiar with the system using it, you have Internet Explorer for them, not Microsoft Edge. And so they don't have to worry about which one's which. They just click the one down there and they're all good to go. So that is the quick difference there. Okay. And of course, as I've already demonstrated, the way to access an NVR in the browser is to take its IP address, which we can find, of course, from if we head into our NVR and we go over to System and then Network, we can find our IP address of our NVR right here, this IPv4 address. And of course, if we take that and I have the same one here plugged into Internet Explorer, and we just plug that in, it will take us. Oh, I switched networks. Let me switch that back. Of the NVR. So I'm just running something quickly here. I'm going to reset my Internet Explorer so I can get a fresh environment. Okay. And now let me share that again. So here, I've reset Internet Explorer so I have the same experience as a fresh new browser install. So it's the same situation as you have on a customer's network with a new camera system install. We go to their page for the first time. Let's see here. 6.107. I want to cooperate with me now. 8.107. That's what we're looking for. Keep forgetting about that. Okay, so let's forget about this for now. But the first thing we're going to see is we're going to see up top, it's going to prompt us to download and install a plugin. And I already have the plugin installed here, but the way we're going to do this is we're just going to download this, run the program, and of course it gives me a message saying it's already been installed. But otherwise, we're going to just install that program, it's going to give us a plugin, and then the next time we come back to that page, it's going to ask us for permission to run that plugin, and we're going to just hit allow, and then we're going to see that yellow banner at the top is going to disappear. And then when that yellow banner is not there, that means our plugin is installed and it's loaded properly and it's all good. And if you remember back on Firefox, that plugin banner would not go away because Firefox wouldn't load the plugin. So here we have our plugin loaded. We can just log into our NVR, and the password we're going to be using here, username and password, could be the same, exactly the same thing as we use if we're using the HMI interface on the monitor of the NVR. The web interface is designed to mimic the HMI interface, the same interface you're going to be using on the monitor, as closely as possible. So everything is generally in the same spot. So if we need to load up cameras, same thing as it is on the HMI, it's going to be in the same positions. And if we go into setup, we're going to end up with much the same thing. And accessing the web interface of a camera is much the same. All we have to do is take the IP address of the camera, put it into the browser, download our plugin, then give the plugin permission, log in to the camera, and we're usually good to go. Now, this is often difficult, though, because very often our computers are on the customer side of the network because we're connected to Wi-Fi. And so, like I showed you in the diagram before, with easy tools, Let me just pull that up again. With this scenario, imagine we're a red PC. We can't actually get into the IP address and connect to these cameras. We can only see these ones because they're on this side of the network, and we can get to the NVR because it's still facing this side of the network. But there is actually a couple ways we can get in and connect into these cameras, and there are two ways I'm going to show you how to do that. So the first way, and this is the much easier way, is if we connect to the NVR that the cameras are actually attached to, what we can do is we can go to the camera in our web interface, and we'll see over on the right there are buttons that we have there for access. So let's try here, and let's try this camera here, and if I hit access, we can actually bring up a web page here. If we see here, this says IPC2322, which is a model of our IP cameras. So this actually lets us connect, if we see in the URL here, this actually lets us connect to the camera's web interface through the NVR. So if we log in here to the camera, we actually are able to bring up the camera's web interface. And if we go to setup, we can see we have the exact settings here. Product model, product firmware version. These are the settings we would be getting if we went into the web interface, if we put in the IP address of the camera directly into our browser. So this way, if we're able to access the NVR, we can use this access to get through to the camera without actually having to connect to it. And this is very useful because it lets us adjust all those things without actually connecting to the camera, but there are a couple of limitations. This will not work if we're accessing the NVR through EasyCloud. This will also not work if we're accessing the camera, the NVR remotely, because this uses a special thing with ports to designate which camera we're connected to, so the NVR can sort of pass them, act as a relay and pass the messages between you and the camera. But so this will only work if we're connecting to the NVR over local network. But it's nonetheless a very useful tool if we need to configure something that's in the camera's interface instead. And the other way you're going to want to access cameras is if for whatever reason this doesn't work, if for example, you can't add the camera into the NVR, or if there's some connectivity issue that you want to test, the other way that we would recommend to access the cameras is with a laptop, for example, what you can do is you can actually, if your laptop has an Ethernet port, you can plug a cable into that Ethernet port and then into one of the PoE ports on the back of a PoE NVR. And this will actually let you connect to the cameras on the internal side of the network that the NVR runs. Because the NVR, alongside connecting to the cameras, also runs a DHCP server. So if we plug in our laptop to the NVR, that'll allow our laptop's Ethernet adapter to pick up an address, and that address will be in the same range, same subnet as the IP cameras connected to the NVR. So the process we're going to do this is, let's say we need to upgrade the firmware on a camera because for whatever reason it's not connected to the NVR, we can't go through, and so we need to just connect to the camera directly and upgrade the firmware like that. Well, our first step is then to download whatever firmware file locally onto the laptop and save it there, and then record down the actual IP address of the camera we're going to want to access. Then we can disable the Wi-Fi on the laptop, plug it into one of the PoE ports on the NVR. That'll give the laptop an address that's in the same subnet as the camera's connected to the NVR, plug in our IP address into Internet Explorer, and we'll be able to get connected there, and this way we'll be directly connected to the camera, not running through the NVR. So this is it's obviously a much better idea to use the access if possible, if it's working for us. But in some scenarios, we may need to connect to the cameras directly, and this is the easy way to do this without having to connect up to a PoE switch or any sort of issues with that. But this is a way we can just deal with cameras that are set up, that are already configured on a site if we need to do something in their interface like that. So I'm nearly finished. There are just a few more considerations I want to talk about when using the web interface. So here we have, this is our camera interface. Let's get out of that and go back to our NVR interface. So one important thing that is a very common thing with cameras is people want to be able to download video clips or back up a certain segment of video from their cameras to their local PCs through the web interface. And this is a very straightforward process. There are a couple of ways we can do this. So if we go to playback and we take one of our cameras here, if we pull up this one, for example, and we just start here, we do some playback, we'll see, you know, infrared, middle of the night. We can actually take a video clip just by hitting this clip button. We can let it run, we can let it run, we can let it run. Then we can hit stop the clip, and we're going to see, click the save button download. So we click the save button. As it goes to clip, I'll saw 6 seconds clip. Click here, download, and we got operation failed. Now, why are we getting operation failed? Well, let's see here. One thing that's important is that on a lot of systems, Internet Explorer will not run with administrator permissions by default. And for our camera here to be able to save files to the local computer, to be able to generate files, we are going to need that administrator permission. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to close Internet Explorer, and I'm going to share the screen. And you can see, if we search for Internet Explorer, and this time we right-click and we run as administrator, give it permission to run, and we've started up Internet Explorer. So now I'm just going to go back to sharing Internet Explorer here. And we go back to our, and this time I remember it's 8. Here, log in. Okay, and we'll go back to playback. Find our camera again. Take a short clip. Let it play. Let's just run to here. Stop our clip. Hit the save button. This is 26 minutes. This is probably going to take a while. Let's do a smaller clip. Do a clip. Pause that. Save that. Select. And download. And now we can see our download here. You see the progress bar up here. It succeeded, and we're able to find it at this location. But so it's important when you're trying to download videos through the web interface that if you're running into a problem, you're going to need to give the browser administrative permission. And one other setting about that is if we actually go to Setup, we go to Client, here is where we can actually determine where that video file is going to be saved to on the local computer. So if we go Browse, we can select create whatever folder we want to do and determine, you know, where are we going to save our files to. So we want to run as an administrator, we want to do that. And if we don't want to use the clip feature, if we want to say download, what if we want to download from all the cameras at once? We want to see what happened 5 minutes last night. There was a break-in. What do we get? We want the footage from all the cameras. What we can do is we can hit Max Cameras, and we can hit a download button here, and we can actually say we want to start from midnight, and we want to go to 5 minutes past midnight. So 5 minutes past midnight. Okay, so we say start midnight, go 5 minutes past midnight, and query. And now this is giving us on all 7 of our cameras that we have active. Here's the clips from midnight to 5 minutes past midnight, and it's 5 minutes. And we can select all of them, normals, download, or we can, so high and normal. Our recommendation is if you are downloading remotely, if you are not on the local network with the NVR, use normal. Otherwise, use high. Unless there's an issue, then switch to normal. So, because of course, normal is going to be slower, but it's going to be more stable. So we recommend that for a remote connection. So I'm on a local network, so I'm going to go high. I'm going to go download. And here we can see it's in progress, downloading each of the clips one by one here. So I'm just going to cancel. I'm going to go and cancel all of these. Okay, and I see download key up there. And if we change our folder before, then that would change it there. So that's it for my portion of the presentation. I'm gonna see if there's any questions in chat now. So I see from Michael here, he asks, is IE10 or even older versions supported? And we do recommend to use the latest version of Internet Explorer, but in our experience, IE9 and IE10 should work properly, but we do recommend the latest version of IE11 as that is what our plugins are designed for. So, are there any other questions?
Hey, Daniel.
Okay. Doesn't seem like there's any other questions here. If you have a question at any time, please send an email to support@pedawise.com. I'm just going to put that in the chat. And our support team would be glad to answer any questions you have about our systems. Feel free at any time. As for the webinar, thank you for attending the webinar. We will be, okay, got another question here. We explain the reason again for running IE in administrator mode. So the reason why we do that, if you remember the first time that I tried to download the videos from Internet Explorer, it said operation failed. And really what's happening there is because the way that we are able to access our NVR and sort of interface with it is we have that plugin program that we download when we first access the NVR. That plugin program, Windows is a very secure operating system. It's very cautious about what it lets its programs do in order for people's security. So what it does is it basically doesn't let any program really create files or adjust your files on your computer unless you give it permission. And what we're doing when we run IE as an admin, we're saying we want to run the plugins that are connected to this as an admin as well. And that lets the NVR basically use the plugin to create the recording file on our computer. If we didn't give it administrator permission, Windows wouldn't let it create the video file. But since we gave permission, it can then create the video file. Does that answer the question? Okay, so again, if you have any other questions, you can send an email to our support team. And like I said, both the recording of this webinar, once it's available, and all of the documents, all the images I've used here, will be available for download. We'll get a copy of the documents sent out to your email as soon as possible, but of course it's always going to be available on our website. So here, if we take a look, Internet Explorer again, we go to pedawise.com, and under training, we'll see we have our webinar schedule here. So this will be like our previous webinar. It will be available to watch the video and download the files, and any upcoming webinars will be posted here. So again, I'd like to thank everyone for attending, and have a great day.